They thought it was hilarious. A billionaire obsessed with ruthless efficiency, set up with an exhausted single mom who brought her 4-year-old to a blind date. A living punchline for my friend's amusement. But when I looked across that sticky diner table, the joke wasn't on her. It was on them. I build enterprise logistics software. It is a profoundly boring industry, devoid of glamour, entirely dependent on shaving fractions of a cent off supply chain operations. It is also an industry that made me a billionaire by the time I was 32. My name is Nathan Croft, and for the last 8 years, I have lived a life constructed entirely of metrics, risk assessments, and heavily curated social interactions. I don't do surprises. I don't do chaos. My inner circle knows this. Trent and Jared, guys I've known since we were scraping by in a cramped Stanford dorm, know this better than anyone. They also know that my dating life has become a corporate exercise. PR handles the vetting. My assistants schedule the dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants where the lighting is dark, the portions are microscopic, and the women are inevitably C-suite executives or minor celebrities who view me as a strategic merger. It's sterile. It works. Or at least it did. Until a damp Tuesday evening in late October. Trent had been relentless for weeks about setting me up. "She's outside the bubble, Nate," he'd said, leaning against the glass wall of my office, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Normal, grounded, doesn't care about your portfolio. Just a nice woman I met through my sister. Trust me, go." I agreed simply to get him out of my office. He gave me an address for a Tuesday night at 7. My driver pulled the Maybach up to the curb. I didn't look up from my iPad until the car came to a complete halt. When I did, I frowned. We weren't in the financial district. We weren't in the trendy warehouse district either. We were in a strip mall in the suburbs. The neon sign, buzzing violently in the rain, read, "O'Malley's Family Grill." "Are you sure this is the address, David?" I asked, staring at a giant plastic cow mounted near the entrance. "Yes, Mr. Croft," my driver replied, his tone perfectly neutral, though I caught the slight furrow of his brow in the rearview mirror. I double-checked the coordinates Mr. Trent provided. I sighed, buttoning my Tom Ford suit jacket. It was charcoal, tailored to a millimeter of my life. Completely ridiculous for a place that prominently advertised a Kids Eat Free special on a sagging vinyl banner. I stepped out into the drizzle. The moment I pushed through the heavy glass doors, the smell hit me. Fried oil, cheap cheese, and the faint, unmistakable undertone of floor cleaner. The host stand was empty. A teenager in a heavily stained apron eventually wandered over, chewing gum with the slow, rhythmic jaw movement of a grazing ruminant. "Just me," I said. "I'm looking for a Chloe." The teenager pointed a greasy finger toward the back corner. Booth 12. I navigated through a maze of screaming toddlers, exhausted parents, and sticky linoleum. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text from Trent in our group chat with Jared. Trent: "Enjoy the baggage, bro. Thought you needed a reality check. Don't slip on the crayons." Jared: I stopped walking. My jaw tightened. It was a joke, a prank. They hadn't set me up on a date to broaden my horizons. They had set me up with someone they deemed entirely inappropriate for my lifestyle, just to see how fast I would sprint for the exit. It was a frat boy stunt orchestrated by men pushing 40. I looked toward booth 12. She was sitting there, Chloe. She didn't look like a punchline, but she did look intensely, overwhelmingly tired. She wore a faded navy blue cardigan over a plain white t-shirt. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy knot at the nape of her neck, held together by a plastic claw clip that looked like it was missing a few teeth. And sitting next to her, kneeling on the vinyl upholstery and aggressively dragging a red crayon across a paper placemat, was a small boy. He looked to be about 4 years old. He had a smudge of dirt on his cheek and was wearing a t-shirt featuring a heavily pixelated dinosaur. Chloe was leaning over, whispering something to him, trying to keep his volume down. She looked up and caught me staring. I watched her eyes drop from my face to the cut of my suit, to the gold Patek Philippe on my wrist. I saw the exact moment the confusion crystallized into realization, and then plummeted into a quiet, crushing humiliation. Trent hadn't just lied to me. He had lied to her. He had probably told her she was meeting a normal guy, maybe an accountant or a middle manager. He had set her up to feel small. My chest went entirely cold. The anger I felt toward Trent shifted from irritation to a quiet, glacial rage. I didn't turn around. I didn't walk out. I walked straight up to booth 12 and stood by the table. The little boy stopped coloring and stared at me, his eyes wide. Chloe swallowed hard, her hands instinctively moving to pull the paper menus over the scattered crayons, a defensive gesture to hide the mess. "Hi," she said, her voice tight. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're Nathan, Trent's friend." "I am," I said. I didn't sit down immediately. I let the silence hang for just a fraction of a second, registering the dark circles under her eyes, the faint stain, baby formula or yogurt maybe, on the shoulder of her cardigan. She was bracing herself for me to make an excuse. She was waiting for me to say there had been a mistake, check my watch, and walk back out into the rain. "Trent told me you were an actuary," she said softly, looking at my suit again. "I'm guessing not." "No, I run a logistics firm," I replied. She nodded slowly. She looked down at her son, then back up at me. Her spine straightened. The humiliation I saw a moment ago was instantly replaced by a fierce, protective dignity. "Look, Nathan," she said, keeping her voice incredibly steady, "I don't know what Trent told you. He told me this was casual. He knew I didn't have a sitter tonight. If this is some sort of joke, or if you're uncomfortable, you don't have to stay. We can just pretend this didn't happen. Save yourself the awkwardness." She was giving me an out. She was trying to protect her own pride and her son from a man she assumed was a wealthy, arrogant jerk about to bolt. I looked at the kid. "What's your name?" "Sam," the boy declared loudly. "I have a T-Rex." He held up a plastic dinosaur missing its left arm. "Solid tactical choice," I told him. I looked back at Chloe. She was frozen, waiting for my next move. I unbuttoned my suit jacket, pulled out the aggressively sticky vinyl chair opposite her, and sat down. "I am completely out of my depth, Chloe," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "But I haven't eaten since 6 this morning, and I hear O'Malley's does terrible things to a mozzarella stick. Mind if I join you?" Chloe just stared at me. Her hands remained flat on the table, framing a pile of heavily battered crayons. She was scanning my face for a smirk, a trace of condescension, any sign that I was playing along with a cruel prank. I kept my expression completely neutral, matching her gaze. In my world, negotiations are won in the pauses. But I wasn't negotiating here. I was trying to de-escalate. "You're wearing a suit that costs more than my car," she pointed out, her tone flat. "To a place that serves unlimited breadsticks in a plastic basket." "It's a Tuesday," I replied evenly. "I came straight from the office. And honestly, I'm hoping those breadsticks are imminent. Sam, oblivious to the high-voltage tension radiating across the table, leaned forward. "Do you like dinosaurs?" "I prefer logistics," I told the 4-year-old, "but as far as giant extinct predators go, they rank fairly high." Sam blinked, processing the vocabulary. He decided it was a satisfactory answer and went back to vigorously scribbling a purple sky on his placemat. Chloe let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since I walked in. She leaned back slightly against the booth. "Trent set this up as a joke, didn't he?" she asked. The armor was back up. Her voice was quiet so Sam wouldn't hear, but it had an edge sharp enough to cut glass. "He brought his car into my auto body shop last month. We got to talking. I mentioned I was tired of dating guys who couldn't handle a single mom schedule. He said he had a regular, dependable guy for me, a numbers guy, an auto body shop. I mentally filed that away. "Trent is a vice president at my company," I said, choosing my words with surgical precision. "We went to college together. He has always possessed a juvenile, fundamentally broken sense of humor. He thought matching a hyper-scheduled CEO with a working mother would be highly entertaining for him. He was wrong." Chloe's eyes narrowed. "So you're staying out of spite?" "I'm staying because I am genuinely hungry," I lied easily. I wasn't hungry at all. And because walking out on a woman and her child to satisfy the ego of an overgrown frat boy is bad business. Furthermore, you seem infinitely more interesting than the people I usually eat dinner with. A waitress materialized, dropping 3 heavily laminated menus onto the table. She looked at my suit, snapped her gum, and asked for drink orders. I asked for sparkling water. Chloe ordered a Diet Coke. Sam demanded apple juice in a cup with a lid. When the waitress left, Chloe let out a small, tired laugh. It was a dry sound, completely devoid of self-pity. "Well, since we're entirely dispensing with the blind date pleasantries, yes, I manage an auto body shop. No, I don't get out much. Yes, my son goes everywhere with me, because childcare in this city requires taking out a second mortgage. I'm exhausted. My shirt has yogurt on it. If you want to talk about stock portfolios or whatever it is billionaires discuss over dinner, you're going to have to talk very slowly." I felt a strange, unfamiliar jolt in my chest. It wasn't pity. It was profound respect. In my orbit, people spent millions of dollars obscuring their flaws, projecting an aura of effortless perfection. Here was a woman laying out her liabilities like a balance sheet, completely unashamed of the math. "I spend 14 hours a day talking about portfolios," I said, resting my forearms on the table. "If I have to do it for another minute today, I might actually throw myself into O'Malley's deep fryer. Tell me about the auto shop." She hesitated, then began to talk. And for the next 40 minutes, as we navigated plates of alarmingly orange mozzarella sticks and lukewarm chicken tenders, I listened to a reality I had completely insulated myself from. Chloe didn't whine. She spoke with pragmatic efficiency about supply chain delays for car parts, a topic I actually understood perfectly. She talked about managing mechanics who didn't like taking orders from a 30-year-old woman. She talked about the relentless, grinding logistics of keeping a small human alive and happy on a razor-thin margin. I didn't offer solutions. I didn't try to play savior. Men like me default to fixing things with capital. I sensed immediately that throwing money or unsolicited advice at Chloe Bennett would be deeply insulting to her. So I just listened. Midway through the meal, Sam knocked his apple juice over. The plastic lid failed entirely. A sticky yellow tsunami rushed across the table. heading directly for my cuffs. Chloe gasped, her hands flying out to grab napkins, a look of absolute panic crossing her face. "Oh my God, Nathan, your suit! I'm so sorry!" I didn't flinch. I calmly lifted my forearms, stood up and pulled the cloth napkin from my lap, tossing it onto the spill like a sandbag halting a flood. I didn't break eye contact with her. "It's fabric, Chloe," I said softly. "It can be dry cleaned. Breathe." She froze, a crumpled wad of paper napkins in her hand. She looked from the contained spill to my face. The panic slowly drained out of her, replaced by something I couldn't quite read. Vulnerability, maybe. "Sam," she said, her voice shaking just a fraction. "What do we say?" "Sorry," Sam mumbled, looking down at his lap, thoroughly chastised. "Apology accepted," I said, sitting back down. I reached over, took a dry napkin, and wiped a rogue splash of juice off the plastic T-Rex. "Your dinosaur survived the flood. Minor casualties. The ecosystem will recover." Sam giggled. Chloe stared at me. "You're not what I expected," she said quietly. "Neither are you," I replied. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Trent. I ignored it. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't thinking about my calendar, or my inbox, or the market opening in Tokyo. I was looking at a woman who had fought tooth and nail for everything she had, sitting in a fluorescent-lit diner. And I realized how incredibly hollow my own heavily curated life actually was. The joke was absolutely on Trent. He had tried to show me a nightmare. Instead, he had just shown me the first real thing I'd seen in years. The following morning, the glass and steel monolith that housed my company felt distinctly different. It felt sterile. For 8 years, I had viewed the muted grays, the soundproofed walls, and the hushed efficiency of my executive floor as the pinnacle of achievement. Walking out of the elevator at 7 a.m., it just felt empty. I was at my desk, reviewing a quarterly risk assessment for European freight acquisition when the door swung open. Trent didn't knock. He never knocked. He strolled in holding a cup of artisan espresso, a smug, expectant grin plastered across his face. Jared hovered a few steps behind him, looking slightly more cautious. "So," Trent said, dropping into one of the leather chairs opposite my desk. He kicked his feet up, resting his expensive loafers on the edge of my mahogany table. "How was the mozzarella? Did you make it past the coloring menu, or did you fake a work emergency before the entrees arrived?" I didn't look up from my tablet. I let the silence stretch. 5 seconds. 10. 15. In a boardroom, silence is a weapon. It forces the other side to scramble, to fill the void, to reveal their insecurity. Trent cleared his throat, his grin faltering. He pulled his feet off my desk. "Come on, Nate. It was a joke. Lighten up. You've been wound so tight lately, I figured you needed a shock to the system. Seeing how the other half lives. The exhausted minivan driving half." I locked my tablet and set it down. I looked at Trent. Really looked at him. I saw a man who had coasted on generational wealth, a decent golf handicap, and a complete lack of empathy. "You told her I was an actuary," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Yeah, well, I didn't want to spook her," Trent chuckled, though the sound was hollow. "If I told her you were a billionaire, she would have shown up in a sequin dress trying to secure a bag. I did you a favor. You didn't do me a favor, Trent. You used a woman who works 14 hours a day and is raising a child alone as a prop for your own amusement," I said. I folded my hands on the desk. "You set her up to feel inferior. You lied to her, and you lied to me, and you executed the entire thing with the tactical grace of a drunk frat boy. Jared shifted uncomfortably by the door. Nate, he was just messing around. I'm speaking to Trent, I cut in, not raising my voice, but injecting it with enough ice to freeze the room. I leaned forward. You think this is about me lacking a sense of humor? It isn't. It's about your fundamental inability to accurately assess risk, value, and human collateral. If you are this careless with people's dignity for a laugh, I cannot trust your judgment with our acquisitions. Trent's face flushed. The smugness vanished, replaced by genuine alarm. What are you talking about? The Berlin merger, I said cleanly. You're off the lead. Hand the files to Sarah and acquisitions by noon. You are sidelined for the rest of the quarter. Nate, you can't be serious. Over a joke blind date? I am entirely serious, I said, picking my tablet back up. Get out of my office. He stared at me, mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Before he turned and stormed out, Jared trailing silently behind him. The room fell quiet again. I looked at my meticulously organized calendar, blocked out in 15-minute increments, predictable, safe, completely devoid of life. I picked up my phone and opened my browser, typing in the name of the auto body shop Chloe had mentioned. Bennett's Collision Repair. An hour later, my driver pulled the Maybach into a gravel lot adjacent to a massive corrugated steel garage. The air smelled of Bondo, aerosol primer, and hot asphalt. It was loud. An air compressor shrieked in the background. I stepped out of the car, ignoring the bewildered stares of two mechanics smoking by a bay door, and walked inside the front office. It was a tiny room, cluttered with clipboards, calendars, and a coffee pot that looked like it had been burning the same pot of sludge since 1998. Chloe was behind the counter. She had a phone wedged between her ear and her shoulder, rapidly typing on a weathered keyboard while simultaneously pointing a stern finger at a mechanic who was holding a dented fender. I don't care what the distributor says, Mike, she was saying into the phone, her voice carrying that same pragmatic authority I'd heard last night. You promised that OEM bumper by Tuesday. It is Wednesday. If it's not on my dock by 3 p.m., I am canceling the order and calling your competitor. Do not test me. She slammed the phone down onto the receiver. She let out a long, exhausted sigh, pinching the bridge of her nose. Your negotiation tactics are highly effective, I said from the doorway. Her head snapped up. Her eyes went wide. She looked at me, standing in her grimy office in a bespoke suit. And for a second, she looked entirely lost for words. Nathan, she breathed, what are you doing here? I have a proposition for you, I said, stepping up to the counter. I didn't look at the dirt or the mess. I just looked at her. And I promise it doesn't involve O'Malley's Family Grill. Chloe crossed her arms defensively, a smudge of grease marking her left cheekbone. If you're here out of some misplaced sense of billionaire guilt over your friend's prank, you can leave right now. I don't need charity, and I definitely don't need pity. I don't do pity, Chloe. It's an inefficient emotion, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. I fired Trent from a $30 million acquisition this morning because he demonstrated a catastrophic lack of judgment. That was business. Me being here is personal. She blinked, the defensive posture slipping just a fraction. You took him off a deal? Over last night? I did. I leaned casually against the scuffed laminate of the front counter. You told me yesterday the guys bolt because they can't handle your schedule. You have no free time, you have zero energy for games, and your son is a non-negotiable variable. He's not a variable. He's my life. she corrected sharply. Exactly. So I am removing the logistical friction, I said. I pulled a small, thick card from my pocket and slid it across the counter. This Saturday at 1 p.m., I rented out the entire top floor of the City Science Center. It's closed to the public. There are no crowds, no lines, and nobody to judge you if Sam spills a drink. I also hired a pediatric educator to lead a private dinosaur excavation exhibit for him. He will be safe, entertained, and 10 feet away from us at all times. Chloe stared at the card. She looked at it as if it were a bomb waiting to detonate. While he is digging up fossilized raptors, I continued, you and I are going to sit at a table that does not have sticky vinyl. A chef is going to prepare a lunch that does not come out of a deep fryer. And we are going to have a conversation that isn't interrupted by a screaming toddler or a frat boy's text messages. She looked up at me, her dark eyes searching mine for the catch. In her world, things like this didn't happen without a price tag attached. Why? She asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Why are you doing this? Because I spent my entire adult life optimizing everything until there was nothing real left, I told her, stripping away the armor I'd worn for a decade. I live in a vacuum, Chloe. I met you, and you were chaotic and tired and entirely uncompromising about who you are. I want to know you, on your terms. She looked down at her hands stained with primer and grease, and then back at my pristine cuffs. A slow, tentative smile finally broke across her face. It completely changed her. It was a breathtaking thing to witness. Sam only likes the carnivorous dinosaurs, she warned softly. I already specified the T-Rex, I replied. Saturday arrived. I stood in the massive, sunlit atrium of the Science Center. I had bought companies and liquidated assets without a spike in my heart rate. But as I watched the elevator doors open, my pulse was hammering against my ribs. Chloe walked out. She wasn't wearing a cocktail dress, and she hadn't tried to transform herself into the kind of woman who usually sat across from me at Michelin-starred restaurants. She wore a pair of dark tailored jeans, a simple silk blouse, and flat boots. Her hair was down. She looked stunning, entirely comfortable in her own skin. Sam bounded out next to her, clutching the same plastic dinosaur from Tuesday. When he saw the massive, assembled skeleton of a Spinosaurus dominating the hall, he dropped the toy and let out a shriek of pure, unadulterated joy. The afternoon went flawlessly, not because it was heavily funded, but because it was built around them. The educator whisked Sam away to a sandbox filled with plaster bones just across the glass partition. Chloe and I sat at a small table draped in white linen. There was no pretense. We ate roasted sea bass, and she told me about her late father, who had left her the auto shop, and the crushing weight of keeping his legacy alive while raising a boy who had his grandfather's eyes. I told her about the isolation of building an empire from a dorm room, how wealth became a fortress that eventually turned into a prison. I told her things I had never spoken aloud to therapists, let alone business partners. We didn't solve each other's problems. I didn't offer to buy her shop. She didn't offer to fix my cynical worldview. But for 3 hours, the exhaustion vanished from her eyes. She laughed, a real, rich sound that echoed through the empty museum hall. At the end of the day, as we walked out to the cars, Sam had fallen asleep on my shoulder. I was carrying him. His sticky hand was clutching the lapel of my jacket. I didn't care. I felt the steady rise and fall of his breathing, and I looked over at Chloe, who was watching me with a quiet, fierce intensity. He ruins dry-clean-only fabric, she whispered. I can buy more suits, I said, looking back at her. I can't buy this. My friends thought they were setting up a punchline. They thought pairing a ruthless CEO with a struggling single mother would be the ultimate disaster. But they fundamentally misunderstood the equation. They looked at Chloe and saw baggage. I looked at her and saw the strongest, most resilient return on investment I had ever encountered. It wasn't a joke. It was the beginning of my actual life. They wanted a punchline, but instead, they gave me the wake-up call of a lifetime. Love isn't found in a boardroom or on a balanced spreadsheet. It's found in the messy, loud, and uncompromising reality of everyday survival. Have you ever been judged by someone who completely misunderstood your worth? Drop your story in the comments below. Hit that like button if you believe in unexpected romance. And subscribe for more stories that prove the best things in life are never planned.